I think the quotes from Chanel where she says like my overnight success has taken 14 years, and I feel the same. The last 10 years have taught me how to run the last year and a half of my business, and that's what I think I'm taking away from like this entrepreneurial journey right now, is that it's not overnight.
You're listening to Not My First Guest. I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. Today, I'm joined by Abby Foster, founder of Elent. Abby took an unusual path into entrepreneurship. After becoming a qualified ACA Chartered Accountant, Abby began her professional career in the luxury magazine sector at Condé Nast, before moving on to Hearst Publishing's finance department. She loved spending time outside of work, supporting colleagues and friends to better understand their own personal finances. But it was through this experience that Abby noticed many people, especially women and young people, had low financial literacy and had received little to no financial education in school or at university. From this realisation, Elent was born, with a mission to eradicate inequalities in our society by making financial education accessible to all from a young age. Abby founded Elent in October 2021. And has since partnered with 24 schools, educating over 20,000 students and counting. In this episode, we'll discuss why you never want to be a finished product, growing from 3,000 to 60,000 followers in a month, finding the right combination of people to build your dream team, calling out acronyms as a life lesson, and accepting growth in all aspects of your life as a founder, not just the business. So without further ado, let's get started. So welcome to the podcast. It's so exciting to have you. I want to dive straight in the place we always start, which is you actually took a really interesting route into entrepreneurship, a route not that many entrepreneurs have taken, which was that you had like a clear vocation before you started. You were an accountant, qualified, you had a very, very smart career behind you. You were working in really interesting companies. So how do you get from there to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I did. So I had a clear progression of where I was going. So I started off as a junior accountant. I did my ACA exams. So it was like 15 exams post university. And then I was working my way kind of up the ladder, senior management accountant, next would have been like finance manager, head of finance, that kind of thing. There was a real clear progression, but I realized very quickly after finishing my ACA that I wasn't using my accountancy qualification the way I wanted to use it. Many people use it to, climb the financial ladder, but I didn't want to. I had a dream to do something about financial education and about like the gender pay gap, and I wasn't using my ACA for that purpose. So I decided to kind of stop that part of my career and start fresh, which was very scary because it's very unlike me and very un-accountant as well. It's not very type A personality, is it, to just drop everything and start again? But yeah, that's what I chose to do. So that's where we are now.
So tell me about that process. Like, how much was it I'm just going to stop and then start something new? Was there how did you make that leap? And what made you decide now's the time, I want to start? And was it, because I think one of the things that slightly throws founders is this idea that like you're looking at founders who are a few years into their business and they actually know what they're doing now. Like Elent is in an incredible place. You're growing fast. Was when you quit, were you leaving for the idea that Elent is now? You obviously had a shared mission because it was around financial education, but like what were you actually leaving to create?
No, I didn't really know what Elent was going to be. Elent has changed an awful lot in the last year and a half. And when I left, I had an incredible manager at my old company, and she was very, very supportive. And I told her my dreams and my aspirations for it. And we kind of both came to the idea that as much as she wanted me to stay and we were going to work on a system where I would work maybe a few less days a week and all this, I just had to take the jump. I had a 3-month notice period, and I just one day woke up and I was like, yeah, I'm going to hand that in and I need to just jump. Like for lots of people, it is not a possibility, but I had saved up a lot of money to be able to start Elent, and I knew it was my dream, and I had a lot of support from like my friends and my family. And so, yeah, like vividly remember Christmas, like popping a bottle of bubbles because I'd left and that was it. I was never going back. And it was a very scary realization before, like leaving for Christmas and realizing that in the January you're not going back to a stable job anymore. That was quite tricky, but I had a lot of support, and I think if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't have felt as comfortable doing it. But it has changed a lot. When I started, I was only teaching sixth formers, and I was only going to be doing this sort of thing, and I was very restrictive of myself, really. I would say things like, I'm only doing this age group, I'm only going to be talking to this particular person, because I thought you had to niche really early. All of that's out the window. I teach every year, I teach every school, every gender. There is nothing off limits, and sometimes I think, we can force ourselves into a niche that doesn't actually suit us, and it will eventually come out. What you're meant to be doing will eventually find its way out into the world, and that's kind of what's happened with Elent, really.
Love that. And I think it's really nice to hear it's not nice to hear the fear. I'm not happy you were scared, but I think it's helpful for founders to hear if you're in that moment, and also to hear that, like, I think we often hear it's a massive leap, but to hear you be honest about, like, you took the time to save in advance of that, and actually that then does give you the security to jump. And I think often, there are steps before quitting that are really important to take to give you your personal runways. So I think that's key. And I think I'd love to go into, so how did you get your first customers? Like, how did you find your first schools, and how did you, like, what were some of the learnings around suddenly you're moving from being an in-house accountant where, as you say, like, there's a career, there's a clear path for everything, it's kind of all done before, and suddenly you're like, do sixth formers need this? Like, how did you start testing some of the assumptions that were in Elent at the beginning?
Full honesty, I think it was a bit of naivety. I just assumed people would want this. People told me they want it. Everyone I spoke to said things like, I wish I'd had finance at school. I assumed I wanted finance at school. Everyone said yes. So I just assumed I would get customers. It was a very naive approach, really. I didn't do any customer research. I didn't do any accelerator. I didn't do something really beforehand. And I just started knocking on doors, figuratively, and emailing schools, calling schools, asking what they wanted. I lent really, really quickly into my contacts. Anyone I knew that was vaguely anything to do with a school, literally anything, I would ask them, how can I get into your school? How can I teach? I look back now and I do have a little bit of a giggle at how cheap I was. Like, I was basically just doing it for nothing, and I was just trying to get exposure. I was incredibly nervous as well to begin with. Now I don't really get nervous going into schools, and my mum always calls me before and she's like, are you nervous? And I'm like, not really. I love it. That's the bit I love doing. But when I started, I was very nervous. I was very unsure. And you just let the kind of school, especially with the school element, you let them dictate what you start teaching, because you can see on their faces what they want to know. So when I got into the schools finally, I would be testing out what I wanted to teach. And because I'm an accountant, I could kind of flex very quickly. If we were talking about budgeting and it wasn't really exciting them, I could quickly switch on to pay slips. And if I could see actually they wanted to be talking about investing, we could switch to that. And I was just quite flexible at the beginning and working slowly and building up kind of what I could feel from the audience, or the school children, effectively.
And I'm really curious because you talk about nerves, and I have recently been teaching some 15 to 17-year-olds, and I would say I've been teaching for a long time. I don't get that nervous before workshops now. Like, every so often there'll be one and I'm like, oh, I'm really nervous. But like, I've never been so nervous in my life as like standing in front of 15 to 17-year-olds. And I actually like hadn't thought about it in advance. And then suddenly I'm standing in front of these kids, and like, genuinely they just like giggle at you, and you're like, I have never wanted to check my fly was up so compulsively. I like left, I like went, as soon as there was a break, I ran to the bathroom. I was like, what is on my face? Like, it's just terrifying. I wonder, like, two things. One, did you do anything that helped you kind of get over those nerves? Or was it the process of just forcing yourself to do it, which I think is also doing something? And also, because that age group is just terrifying. Like, I genuinely think they're really scary. How has teaching and getting used to speaking in front of that audience, assumption from me, but like, has that made it easier when you then go and speak in front of other audiences? Like, are they less scary?
I find it the other way around. Sometimes when I'm speaking to adults, I'm like, oh my God, they're listening. Whereas with students, I have two things I do. One is a uniform. So I mainly, once or twice I've kind of diverted off of this, but I mainly wear like a black dress, just because I don't have to think about it. I don't overthink it. I just wear it. I know that it's comfortable. I've worn it a million times, and I wear trainers as well because I tried heels. You might look a little bit nicer, but I then constantly have this irrational fear that I'm going to fall off the stage or something. So one is uniform, so just not overthinking what you're wearing, because especially for me, it's quite a personal thing. I don't want to feel like you said, I don't want to be wearing, I've got a zipper or something, or a sweat patch, God forbid. And secondly is calling them out. So students deserve and want respect. And if you say to them, so I've had it as well, you are in a room full of students and you see a group of students, whatever, at the back having a giggle. I am known to do this often, turn around to them, just stop what I'm saying, turn around to them and said, have I got something on my dress or on my face? They immediately stop laughing and they're like, no, it was just about something else. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I immediately feel better because they're probably telling the truth. It probably was, there's something on their phone. I'm aware they're not going to be listening to me 100% of the time. It might have been on their phone. One of the girls might have said something, one of the guys might have said something. But then what happens is when you call them out, silence. They are listening to you. They then know that you've seen them, they've seen you, and it changes the dynamic because you basically kind of open yourself up to being a bit vulnerable to them, and they respect that because they know that you are there to teach them and actually you are aware of them. Because often when we go and teach young people, we think that we have to be the authority and we deserve respect by just being there. But by being vulnerable and just saying to them, I'm human, if you laugh at me, I feel really self-conscious, they will immediately stop. And I've never had it where they carry on either. They just stop and they say things like, oh, no, please don't overthink that, or whatever. And that has always helped me, is one, uniform, and two, calling them out because they're human. And also they need to learn as well that it's really mean. If they're up on that stage and I was laughing at them, how would they feel? That's what I always think. So yeah.
And so you said adults are scarier, and you are doing a lot more public speaking, and I know you've got some big gigs coming up. I don't know if we can talk about them, so I'll leave that to you if you're allowed to mention names. But how do you build your confidence to do that? And I'm kind of slightly jumping around the place, but we're going to come back to how you built up Elent. But so much at the moment is around that education growing from being just in classrooms to being online as well. So you're having to do a lot of online delivery and put yourself very front and center. And I think for a lot of founders, that's really terrifying, or feels like it gets wrapped up in feeling, for really bad reasons, or not bad on the person, but for the wrong reasons, we feel cringe to do it. And I get asked it a lot from people because I put my face very front and center on the Not My First Guest podcast and also on the other companies I'm building. So what for you have been some of those adjustments that you're having to make to teach adults and to kind of grow and do more public speaking? And are there any kind of tips that you've learned for the audiences maybe you are more nervous around?
Yeah, practice. I am never going to be a finished product, and I am a big believer in reading and learning constantly. I don't think I will ever be done. And so I joined a public speaking group. There was a group called Mic Drop, and they're great and they meet every week. I don't go every week. I should. And I get to practice all the time. I go back to a year and a half ago. Hilarity, you can even see some of my Instagram reels and my TikToks, and I look petrified. I look so scared. I'm talking so low as well. I don't know why. I'm talking really quietly. It's a bizarre thing to see, and the development, it's just practice, and from practice you gain a bit more confidence. And when I do work with adults, I used to get really scared. Now I get less so, because sometimes, especially when you're talking to sixth formers, they look like adults. I have honestly been mistaken for a student in a school before, which is, I don't know. But so you there's a fuzzy middle line where you're talking to students and then adults, and you're also trying to give them that respect that they are adults. But when I do talk to adults, I think the difference is just taking it a bit slower as well, because with schools I tend to have a very short amount of time to get as much out of them, whereas when I do my work in workplaces, a bit more time on our hands to kind of get through things and understand, and life has already got in the way when you're an adult, so nothing is that simple anymore. Whereas when you're teaching it before they've become financially active, you can be like, this is a pay slip, this is in general what it will look like. Whereas when you're teaching in a workplace, you have to kind of adapt, because it does look different for everyone. So yeah, I would say practice, joining, and like never thinking that you are the finished product. Just keep working on yourself is something that I've kind of learned along the way.
Love that. And I think it's so powerful for founders, right? Because you are learning about 50 things a day that you've never done before. Having that growth mindset of, I actually can pick this up if I practice it, and I can get better, and it doesn't matter if I've not got there yet. So I want to come back to the kind of growth of Elent. So we started, you've quit the job. We're now doing it for sixth formers, and as you said, it's kind of evolving and growing over a period of time. And I think one thing people sometimes forget is you've had huge growth in the last few months, right? But I think people kind of go, oh, it's an overnight success. And I think that's really rarely true. and I think it's slightly frustrating for founders who've spent the years going, I'm toiling over this thing. So can you tell us a bit about that kind of process of testing and iterating and learning what does and doesn't work, and maybe some of the hard moments in there? Like, did it always feel like it was growing up and to the right, or did it feel like at times like, what am I doing? And also, for a long time you were on your own. You've obviously grown the business now, you've added senior leadership, but you were building it alone for a long time. So can you tell us a bit more about that journey?
I think when it came to starting, and I hear this all the time, it's like the overnight success, because you're right. Basically, about a month ago, we went from 3,000 followers on Instagram to 60 in a month. And it was big, over a viral video, which was amazing. But everyone forgets that for the last year and a half, I have showed up for that Sunday quiz when there was just 2 people doing the quiz. Now we have like 1,000, which is amazing. You know, the Finance Fridays with Foster that I do on Fridays, where I answer people's questions on Instagram stories. Again, sometimes there would be one question, probably from my dad, like who knows really. And now we get hundreds and hundreds of questions, and we are struggling to answer them all. The growth has been incredible, but it's like, I think the quotes from Chanel where she says like, my overnight success has taken 14 years. And that I feel the same, because some people say, do you wish you had started this journey out of uni or even before that? Would you have been ready? The answer is no. I had to go through university for myself. I had to go through the accountancy qualifications for myself. I had to fail many, many times throughout my career to get to a place where I'm confident now to run the business. And I'm confident enough to know when I need help, confident enough to know things I can do, things I can't do. You know, what are my key skills? Because I think often as an entrepreneur, we're always thought we should be doing everything. And at the beginning, I was honestly doing everything. And then I realized this year it was kind of a pivotal moment where I thought, actually, I can't. And there are far better people. I have an incredible team that can do things far better than I can. And so that's kind of led to the growth that we're seeing today. The last 10 years have taught me how to run the last year and a half of my business. And that's what I think I'm taking away from like this entrepreneurial journey right now, is that it's not overnight. But the Instagram, to be honest, felt overnight. I think I was talking about this the other day with someone. You know, we honestly saw a growth of like 40,000 followers in a weekend. It was, I've never seen it. I've never seen anything like it. And lots of people around me kept saying things like, this doesn't happen in the finance space. Like, yes, for other influencers, but not finance. Like, it's not interesting enough. And I was like, well, you'd be surprised, because it affects everyone every single month. So it's clearly interesting enough to get this level of viewership. And we just tried to be really relaxed as well on the platform. I think people were just quite happy to be a part of that community because of that reason, really.
And I think it's one of those things that is really easy to forget, because I think and I've been thinking about it a lot recently, but like that growing to those first 3,000 followers is so much effort and work. And we were talking about this recently about a startup, and we were looking at their number of followers, and I said, actually, what's really interesting is look at their number of posts. And they've done like 1,000 posts, and I was like, this is something they've been grinding at and working, and you can't just skip to suddenly we've got 60 now. I think I literally saw it overnight. I was like, oh, they've gotten to 45,000, and then like the next day it was 60. It was mad. And I want to come back to kind of some tips on content marketing, because I think you're absolutely right. Like, what you're creating is making it interesting, making it accessible, making it fun, which are kind of the key elements of content marketing and great content. And more founders, I think, should be using it. But I want to come back as well first to that question of, you started hiring. We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. one of the biggest challenges I think for founders, for who haven't maybe done a lot of management in their past, or it's now a very different kind of management, is, let's be real, as a founder, you are hiring at least 6 months after you really probably needed someone for that role. You've done it yourself, which means that you have like a ton of opinions on how it should be done and how quick it can be done. And you're hiring under, so the point at which you hire, you're just so desperate for it that you're most stressed, you're least time free. And like, let's be honest, if you were going to be like the best manager, you'd be a lot better rested and a lot, you'd have time for strategy and all these fun things that you just kind of don't really get the time for. So what have been some of your learnings on switching mode from operating alone, where you're doing it all yourself, to hiring a team? And maybe what are some of the things that have gone right and wrong along the way? And where have you, because we also talked about you get a lot of different advice on how to do this. So how have you sifted through that advice in the process?
When it came to hiring, you're so right. I hired 6 months, probably a year later than I should have, really. And I had to just do it. I had to wake up one day and be like, right, I'm going to post the LinkedIn job post and I'm just going to start, because there's never a right time. You've always got all those thoughts, especially as an accountant. I was like, I would like more money in first. I would like more this. I would like more that. And I can do it myself. It's fine. You cannot do everything yourself. And actually, sometimes you're cutting like the legs off of your business by thinking you can. And when I came to hiring, I wanted to find, especially for the first full-time role that we filled, which was for marketing, I wanted to find someone that I could really get on with, that I could spend a day with, not have any issues. And I was really lucky. I found someone like that. With marketing, you have to be constantly evolving. You need a team that will adapt to your working days as well. And especially in a startup, they need to know that it is not 9 to 5. Obviously, we don't expect them to work the same hours as us, but they have to be adaptable. And I was very lucky to find someone that was able to like jump on board and wanted to jump on board. When it comes, I was saying this before I hired, with the marketing element as well, that if you could combine like my passion for finance, someone that had a passion for social media, and then a recording, like a slick recording setup, it would be the dream team. And so I just kind of stood with myself and I was like, well, you can do that. Just hire for those things. You be the passion, hire the social media enthusiast, and then go somewhere and do the shoots. And that's what we did. And when we combined the three, my thoughts were correct, because within 2 weeks of doing that, that's when we saw the huge growth, because actually I was right. And I needed to remember that from the beginning, that my thought, like what I think is going to work will always work. It's just often that, like we said, other people throw doubt into the mix and they'll be like, oh, that hasn't worked for me, or I don't think that will work for you for these reasons. And actually you just need to believe in yourself. Like, the business is a success because of the people within it, not because of necessarily even the product that it produces, because without the people it's nothing. So that's where I kind of, when I was hiring, I wanted to know that, like, one, that I could get on really well with them, but two, that I could see a growth in them, and that I knew that they were going to be the Elent person effectively for me.
And it strikes me that when you're talking about trusting your gut as well, like I often get nervous when founders say that, but when you listen to what you said earlier, there's so much, your gut is testing things as you go. Like, you're testing when you talked about how you develop the course, you're testing with schools what they'll buy, you're testing live with students in the room what they want to listen to, and you're testing, actually, I've got this assumption I can hire someone and I can do this. So I think for founders listening, you're right, there's a huge amount of trust that you have to have for yourself, but also have that caveat where you're like, if I'm wrong, I want to know fast so I can change course.
Yeah, failing fast is really important. I think at the beginning I failed quite slowly and it gave me a lot of stress and anxiety. Now I'm really happy to fail fast. If I want to test something out, I will test it. As soon as it doesn't work, move on. And you have to become quite cutthroat about it. And also you have to be really protective of your time, which comes into that. So when we say fail fast, protect your time. Do not spend days, weeks, hours on things that you don't think are working for you. And it's a personal thing. It doesn't matter if you think it might work in the next year for your business. If it doesn't work for you, you're not going to want to do it. You're not going to carry on with it. It's like with social media. I wanted it to be just financial education. It doesn't, like, obviously I get lots of comments about like, how do I do my hair? And that's absolutely fine, but we don't go on every day, and I don't run a hair tutorial on there every single day, despite the fact people might want that. It's just that actually this is what works for the business, because even if I get asked to do that, I know in myself that the brand needs to remain Elent Finance. Like, it is finance. I'm not a hairdresser. That's just one of those things. So it's a key example of just like leaning into what's good for you. Fail. Don't be afraid to fail, but fail fast. And also don't tear yourself up over it, because I think that's something I'm not very good at. Is I will punish myself for a long time of like failures I've made, and I like keep overthinking them, and like, if I'd made a better decision, but you just gotta let it go.
And I get so torn about that, because I think it's like, it is. And my co-founder and I were talking about it this week, because I literally teach this stuff and I still get really annoyed when we put an MVP out and no one buys it. Like, it's frustrating, but you're right. Like, part of the passion is what you need to keep it going forward and to keep wanting to find the right answer. And part of it is the humility to, as you said, I think earlier, like, I'm not the finished product, and that's okay. And that's as it should be. I want to touch on, I think we might get 2 in 1 here. I want to touch on like bad advice you've had along the way, and fundraising, because I know there's been some really bad advice you've received about the fact that you should be fundraising, and actually you've funded the business differently. You talked about savings at the beginning. I know you've kind of got grants along the way, and I just want to unpack, I guess, some of the worst advice you've had that you would tell founders to ignore if they hear it, and also, fundraising for you, your journey, and what you've taken from it.
This might be quite controversial, because obviously we're on an entrepreneurial podcast, but bad advice I received that just was personal to me, bad, was that I had to have a co-founder. Very early on, everywhere I turned, do you have a co-founder? No. Ooh, the stats are against you. Oh, okay, well, stats are against you anyway. Like, you're starting a startup, especially in the midst of like what could be a possible recession, you're coming out of COVID. The stats are never pro entrepreneurship, are they ever? It never seems to be anyway. But yeah, it was constant. You must have a co-founder, you must have a co-founder, you need a co-founder. And I had to push really hard as to why I was enough. And I think that built a grit in me over the last year and a half that led me to, when I was starting to build out the senior leadership team, I realized I was enough. I just wanted to create perfection. And like, if I was going to do that, what did I need? Rather than I'm not enough. Because very early on, I think I almost made quite a large mistake bringing on someone that I didn't need to bring on. In the end, it didn't happen, so it was fine. But I almost brought someone on and, and gave them equity and all of that kind of thing that I didn't need to, and I shouldn't have. But I was doing it because I didn't think I was enough. And actually, that's just not true. And also the other thing is that, you must be raising. Why? Why must we all be raising? Why? I don't understand. If I could create revenue, the accountant in me was saying, if you can create revenue, then you carry on. Like, what do you, this is we have this fear that if we're not raising, we're not entrepreneurs. And I honestly, anyone that tells me they are raising, I think, good on you. Amazing, because I couldn't do it. I watch them and I see the rise and fall of so many businesses that it isn't all or nothing. You raise or you fail, it feels like. And for me, that's just not who I am. I couldn't do that. And also I'm just never going to be confident enough that early on to be able to go out and pitch like that. I could probably now, but I don't need to, so I don't need to worry about it. But I think it isn't really something I wanted to do. And I think there was this stigma very early on where I'd honestly be at networking events and someone would say, oh, are you raising? How much are you raising? And I'd say, oh, I'm not raising. And then I'd go to explain why I'm not. And you'd see them just switch off and walk away. And I'd think, oh, okay, maybe I'm not enough because I'm not raising. But now, I love it. Love the question. I'm like, no, blah, 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 but like immediately get my reasons in. And I'm like, but actually, I don't need to. And that's like just been a big learning curve for me.
I swear, you're not being paid to say this for If You Raise, but this is basically why we exist, to help founders not do this treadmill. And you're so right, because it's not just you raise a first round. It is often, and not always, but often, if you raise that first round, the expectation is to raise the next and the next and the next, and you're on a treadmill of doing that with your time every you actually do it every 12 months. So I think you're spot on it, and it really harms a lot of founders who could, like you, actually just be getting to revenue faster and building a business and focusing more. You talked as well about your background as an accountant kind of changing some of these things for you. Like, you think, why wouldn't I just get money in the bank? We talked briefly before the episode as well about how actually I think this is really scary for founders, the suddenly having to be financially literate on two levels. Like, one, you have to be financially literate to actually grow the business, and those are like words for things on your, like, what is a balance sheet, and like there's all these new language to learn, and you have to be quite good at it, otherwise you break the business. And then you also have to be personally financially literate at a different level, because you have to manage your own finances and pay yourself in a way that you've kind of, before you just get a pay slip, and obviously you want to be smart with your money, but there are two levels to this. So, and we talked about the kind of how that might advantage you as a founder, but are there some learnings you could pass on to founders who are maybe feeling overwhelmed by this? Maybe they don't know where to start, maybe some practical things that they could do or things that they should look into.
Yeah, we were speaking about this, weren't we? Because I do appreciate, I have a privilege from understanding finance, which I didn't really realize how much of a privilege it was. Like, I don't fear money. I don't fear my P&L every month. I don't fear my self-assessment because I've done it a million times. I know what I'm looking at. I don't worry about things as much as other founders I know that aren't financially literate do when it comes to money. And you can spend an awful lot on accountancy fees because you don't know what you don't know. And I think if I was to give someone advice, and if you don't have a financial background, it's not essential, but ask people, because if someone comes to me and they are trying to run a business and they don't quite understand certain things, I will give them so much time, because I think I see reels on this all the time at the moment, but like, no one that wants you to do well will hold you back. And if anyone comes to me and they're brave enough to start a business, they've got my time, they've got my ears. I will help them. They can ask me questions. I will support them, because there's enough competition as it is anyway. I would just ask around. If you're an early founder and you're not quite sure about finance, you will probably know someone in your world that has either worked in finance, might have an accountancy qualification or something, where you can just ask questions. Go online, start reading. Just don't fear it. I think the worst part is the fear, and it's the doing nothing. If you do nothing and hoping it goes away. So often people say, I had no idea there was a VAT threshold. I didn't really understand what corporation tax was. I didn't think I was earning enough to pay that. So they spend all of their money and forget that actually they need to pay tax, or they think that every expense is a deductible expense. Sadly, not very true. And that is the fear for most people, which I really understand my privilege that I don't have that. But if you are a founder, please just ask people, because there's nothing worse than burying your head in the sand when it comes to finance. And then 2 years down the line, you're being hit with like bills and stress, because actually if you'd just done it a little bit at a time, it would have been okay. But because you've left it now for so long, you have no idea whether you're coming or going. And when it comes to raising, I see pitch decks all the time, and I see financial projections of businesses where, they're talking billions, millions, they're talking big numbers, but yet often they don't even know what they're earning, like on a basic level, or what they could be earning, or what that means in tax. And they'll write down salary, 200 grand. Okay, but what about all the other bits around, like pension and employee national insurance or employer national insurance, things like that is often left out because actually it's not very sexy. It doesn't look very exciting on a pitch deck, but you still need to know it if you're going to run your business correctly.
And I think also just not feeling embarrassed that you don't know these terms. Like, why would you? If you've been doing a non-financial work for a long time, like, of course you don't have that background, but I think so much of the time, I think startup world is very guilty of this. Like, we do talk in shortcuts is a generous way of saying it. Less generous way is like, we love the buzzwords, and like that becomes a very quick way to like know if someone's in or out. And I think don't be embarrassed to ask someone like, hey, I actually don't know what that is yet, could you explain it to me? Or to go and look it up afterwards. Like, it's never, I still maintain this, one of the smartest people I've ever met, and this was a long time ago, we used to work together, and I remember just being in awe of him, because in meetings he'd ask what acronyms meant. And I was like, oh my God, he's so brave. I would never do that. And I'd never do that because I thought people would think I was dumb. And actually, here was he doing it. And I was like, what a clever guy. That's really great. Now I know what this acronym means. And like, so please don't be afraid, founders. And if you're actually thinking of fundraising, I really do think like do a financial model first, do some scenario planning, work out actually why do we need money into the business, work out what happens if you don't raise again, ask yourself these tough questions, but don't be afraid of it, because like financial models they're just logic, and they're a lot less scary than they feel.
Yeah, call out acronyms always, because more often than not, and what makes it really like makes me laugh is that more often than not, the people using them don't understand them. And it really calms me down. I'll go to a networking event, and usually some of the finance ones I go to are very male heavy. They throw acronyms all over the place. And I have got an accountancy degree, and I think, what are you saying? What are you trying to say? They'll do like IR, this RR, and I'm like, what does that mean? And they don't know. And then when you ask them and they say, it's to do with my revenue. And I'm like, okay, carry on. Like, I'm an accountant, I do know this. So try and explain that to me. And then when they can't, I sit there and I think, how many times have I been like held myself back because I didn't think I was very clever, but actually the person in front of me was just bluffing. And that's something that I have kind of had to build myself up along the way to realize that not everyone else understands what they're doing. Like, I do this quote all the time that, I honestly believed everyone else had gone to this lesson where they learn about pay slips, and I'd just not been at school that day, or I'd just not turned up. And it turns out that's the same with a lot of life. People will just kind of blag it, and the rest of us all panic that we don't know what we're doing. Turns out no one else really does. So yeah, always call out acronyms. I think that's like a rule for life, because it makes you feel better when you realize they don't know. And even if they do know, then you know, and you can use it if you want, or don't if you don't. But always call them out.
Love that new rule for life. Okay, so a few more bits I wanted to unpack. One is around specifically like content marketing. So I think founders do get a bit overwhelmed by this. And I think whether that's thinking you need to be nailing it on every single channel that exists. And Threads started a few weeks ago, and I remember there was just like so many memes of all the social media managers kind of freaking out like there's a whole new channel to learn. But also I was thinking like, I bet every founder is like, oh shit, do I need to do this too? I've like barely mastered one. So any kind of practicalities of like how you taught yourself how to do this stuff, maybe some stuff that now seems obvious to you but wasn't obvious to you as you learned about content marketing and how to do it well.
Yeah, we have a marketing queen at Elent called Kira, and when everything was taking off, she was on holiday and it was a nightmare because everything was taking off. Threads had also started, and I had promised myself I was never ever going to be that manager that emailed someone on their holiday or WhatsApp them on their holiday. God forbid. Like, no, we don't do that. We have boundaries. That went. Thankfully, she did reach out first, so it was fine. But I had to say, she said to me, like, have you started Threads yet? What's going on with social? What's going on here? And I was like, yep, okay, I'm on it. And I felt like I was working for Kira, and I was like, yep, I can do that. I'll create the Threads. It's fine. And I opened it. I have not looked at it since. Honestly, God's honest truth, I haven't, because Kira is brilliant at taking my content and manipulating it across all of them. So I can do something for Instagram, and then you can record that and adapt it to a Threads post. You can adapt it to a LinkedIn post. You can adapt it to, it's not as easy to adapt it to a TikTok, but you can, and you can adapt the content across all the platforms. We don't claim to be brilliant at all of them. I struggled really a lot with Instagram at the beginning. It was so slow, and I had some success on TikTok, and I thought, right, I've sussed TikTok, brilliant. It's now flipped the other way. TikTok is really difficult. The algorithm just seems to be against us, or against lots of people at the moment, and Instagram feels easier. I don't know, there might be another flip. We now have X instead of Twitter. There's so many places that you can be. Where are you meant to be? I think what's important is setting up accounts on all of them, because you never want to find out too late that someone's set up an account in the name that you wanted. And like, yes, you might not want to always be on LinkedIn, but you need to have at least like a platform there or a landing page. But having your name across all of them, if that's what you want to do, and then just feeling comfortable with one or two, and not also getting sucked down to a rabbit hole that you have to be on it all the time to be successful, because you don't. You have to show up for the things that you've said to yourself you'll show up for. So for instance, with me, I set the Sunday quiz up quite early on, and the Finance Writers with Foster. And I do these things called stars, where every morning I do like 3 topics of the day. They tend to be like a mix of news or some finance thing that I've learned that day. And I put those on every day. So hold myself accountable to do the stars every day, the Sunday quiz, and the finance advisors for Foster. And so I know at least once a day I'm going to probably go on the stories. Twice a week I'm going to be showing up for the Instagram. And then across the others, I just kind of see what feels natural for me right now. But yeah, it's a consistency, and maybe setting some like goals and boundaries for yourself across the platforms has worked for us, but also getting support. It's honestly undoubtedly taken Elent to where it is now, is getting support of someone that really actually enjoys social media. Because I won't lie, I don't always enjoy it. It's quite tricky. Understanding what everything should look like, you know, the fact that our landing page looks as pretty as it does is not to do with me, like it is to do with Kira. So I'm very lucky in that respect. And I think that's what's also important, is it don't just beat yourself up all the time, because if you scroll back, like even a couple of months, that landing page is not pretty. It's a mess of me working out whether I wanted to just be reels, did I want to be just carousels, did I want to do like Canva posts, did I want to do natural Twitter posts. It's a whole mess, but actually it's just about like getting other people involved that might help you, or learning out what your rhythm is with it and what you were willing to put into it and what you're willing to hold back as well. I think is just as important, because I think often with social media, there is this expectation that we should give our entire selves to it. And actually, people don't really want to know what I had for breakfast, and I'm all right with that. I don't need to tell them. They don't want to know. We all move on with our lives, but they like the stars. So therefore I give them that. And that's what I give them, and then there's things I don't. So yeah, it's finding that boundary as well.
And I think also one of the things that I take from that, because I do think it's overwhelming, and I do think you beat yourself up, but actually having that clarity on like, these are 3 different types of content that I'm going to do each week that I can stay accountable to. Like, it's small, it feels manageable. I'm going to try and do that. Watch this space. We're not having Wednesdays with Willis because I hate Wednesdays, but we'll find another time. And I think this is the other thing, like follow people and get inspired by other people and adapt it and test what people respond to. One thing I was going to ask about is going on TV, because it's sexy and cool. So you were on Sky News last week, very fun. And I think actually this is something I find really interesting for founders, is sometimes we forget about things like PR and actually these other types of growth channels. And I have an incredible PR coach and friend that genuinely has taught me so much that I just didn't know. Like, you can go to a journalist and ask to write an article or to be featured or to be quoted, like all these things I just had no idea about. Anyway, side note, we'll interview her at some point and get PR tips, I promise. But wondered about your experiences of like going on the news, and also like that as a different channel to grow. How did that opportunity come about? What was it actually like going on and having that ridiculous size audience? And how's it been for the business since?
It was bizarre. If you'd asked me like 2 years ago what I thought Elent would look like, it definitely didn't look like me sat on a sofa in the Sky News offices. It didn't. Am I glad we've got to this place? Yes, because it's bringing awareness to something I'm really passionate about, which is financial education and understanding. We got approached by Sky News. It was very chaotic, because that's what I've learned with the news is one minute they said, right, you're going to be on at 12 on Thursday, and this was on a Tuesday, and I was like, oh, okay. Next minute I get an email, nope, scrap that, we'll come back to you. Okay. And then an email 5 minutes later, okay, now you're going to be on at 9. Okay, right. Very chaotic. And you just have to move with it. We had to be adaptable, relaxed, and just kind of lean into it. Very grateful for all of the other experiences I've ever had, public speaking, because it kind of led up to that moment. Take a breath as well. That was really important. I was so worried about talking too fast. I was so worried about messing it up, because it is live. But I was very lucky when I arrived. I realized it wasn't just me. There was me and another guy, and he was like happy to chat as well, which was great. And yeah, it was very quick. We just kind of walked in, sat down, answered our questions, walked out and left. It was very surreal, really. But yeah, PR is really important. And I think that something that entrepreneurs don't talk about it enough very early on is if you want to do that, you have to sacrifice a lot of time for it, because you know, Sky News, I was on for 6.5 minutes, but that whole morning started, well, obviously it probably started at 5 a.m. because I was so nervous, but the whole situation lasted probably about 5 hours in total, from like getting there, like getting set up, being on there, leaving. And that's the part that you then push yourself over, because you think, I was only on for 6.5 minutes, but I've lost half my day. And I now need to find time in my day to email that school back, contact that company, make sure that this content is up for today, you know, post on a story. There's all those other things that you don't think about, and that's why you have full PR teams. Like the moment I can have a full PR team, oh, I'm getting it. So yeah, I would say it was amazing, but you just have to be comfortable adapting to those situations as well.
Also, I just think it's so funny what as founders we almost like don't allow ourselves to count as work. Like I had this yesterday, I did some stuff on social media which I actually had to do, and I met my co-founder afterwards, and I felt like I hadn't worked all morning, and I was like, oh, actually that was this morning's job. And for you it was going on TV, and it takes 5 hours, but like you're coming out, like it's kind of refreshing to hear in a way. It's like not just me who then comes out of this thing and goes, well, I'm now going to focus on everything I haven't done today rather than the one thing I have done, which is amazing. There's so much else we could talk about, and I think maybe we need to do some special at some point about like the education founders need on financial literacy, but I'm aware of time, so I have 2 questions I always ask founders. One is, what are you proudest of that you've achieved at Elent? And it can be, you can have a couple if you want. Feeling generous today.
So the amount of students I've taught. So in the last year, I've taught 20,000 students, which for me, it's just a dream. Like when I started, my whole mission is to financially educate people in general. It wasn't just students. It was just, that's where I was going to start. And I realized just at the end of the school summer holidays, when I like totted up all of the students I'd ever taught, that it hit the like 20 mark. And I thought, my God, that's an awful lot of people. And I was really proud to like hit that number. And then I think the second proudest is just the consistency. I don't often tell myself that I'm proud of myself, because we don't do that. That's not very entrepreneurial. You have to constantly hate yourself for some reason. But I am proud of the fact that I have turned up every single day. You know, there are days when you're not always 100%. You never will be probably, but there are days when I'm 80, 60, even 50% of where I want to be. And there are days when I feel like I have 110% days, and they will even out. But I have turned up every single day, even when I didn't want to. And I think that's what like the success looks like. It's not always hitting these metrics, which I know I just said the first one was hitting a metric, but it's not always hitting those metrics that makes it success. It's the fact that you've turned up every single day, and people turn around to me and they're like, oh, I've watched you since the beginning. And I'm like, yeah, like I have been there since the beginning, and I've been there every day since, and I will continue to always be there. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, in my mind, I will. So I think for me, it's the 20,000 students and the consistency.
I think it's probably an Instagram post, but I saw somewhere like this lovely, sometimes I try and remind myself of it. As you say, we're all terrible at this, but like if you are having a day where you genuinely have 50% and you give that 50%, you've given 100% for that day. And I like, as founders, all you think about is the 50% you couldn't give because you didn't have it. But yeah, you've given what you can. And I think that consistency, rewarding yourself for that, is pretty key, because even if it's not going as fast as you want it to, that's something you can say, I'm delivering that, I'm on that. Okay, we talked earlier about bad advice that you'd had along the way. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Be yourself. I know that's quite cheesy, but I have to remind myself to be myself often, because I'm very good. I think you said something about mirroring earlier. I'm very quick to mirror someone and try and adapt to them and make them feel comfortable. But what can often be negative to that is when you're mirroring someone else, you're not being you, and you're not kind of acting how you would act. And so I will like make other people feel comfortable by saying, don't worry, I'll do that for you, or yep, let me help you, giving too much of myself. And actually I need to remind myself to be me and be rowing my own boat kind of thing, and be aware of what I need for my days. So yeah, being myself is really important, and often I think we forget to do that. But the people around me, my closest people around me, will always remind me that being myself is why we have like those followers, and why we have the students that rebook, or the schools that rebook, because actually they wanted me. They didn't want necessarily a version. They want me, and me being me.
I love that. I'm going to do one more question, because actually we talked about it, and your comment about your friends who are kind of standing in your corner reminded me. So I'm going to break my entire formula and end on a totally different question. But I actually think it's really important for founders, because we're constantly balancing this like work-life piece. And you talked about we've had this like very big success that is very visible on social, which a lot of our friends will be on, even if they're not founders. And we talked earlier about like, actually, like it is really hard as a founder sometimes to handle like who's your friend when. And I don't know if you've got some reflections you can share on that, but like, maybe it's about actually like valuing those who stay with you since day dot, but also being aware that some people are gonna maybe show up a bit later, and like how do you manage that?
I think what's important not to get angry, because I think sometimes, like we even spoke about this earlier, you can get angry when life changes because you want it to be the same, because being an entrepreneur is always up in the air. There's always something else going on. There's always another thing you have to battle, and you would just like some things to stay the same. I would just like people to stay the same. I would like my house to stay, my flat to stay the same. You like things to stay the same, but sadly they don't, because as you're evolving, sometimes the growth comes from within you as well. You're growing yourself, and it means that those people around you, if they've stayed the same, you're not in the same place anymore. And you have to be okay with growth, meaning all aspects of your life, not just your business. And I think for me, it was about not getting upset and angry about it, and just knowing that the same way that I'm like happy about the fact that, you know, we now have a team and that we have these growing followers and we have this growing business and more schools book and all those lovely things happen within the business, that in my own personal life, growth also means that people change. I have new friends that we get each other a bit more, and some friends you don't. And yeah, it's just about not being angry at that situation, because I think we can like tell ourselves off and you shouldn't lose friends, but actually sometimes it's inevitable, because you like the same way you know, put things down in your life to pick up others, it works the same within your personal and your friendship circle as well.
100%. You know, they often talk about like there are people for a season, and I think like picking up founder friends is really important. It's come up on a lot of episodes, but like finding those ways to find people who genuinely empathize and like know what it's like and you can just rant at, I think is really, really helpful. Abby, thank you so much. Like there's so much in this. I loved having you on the show, and I do think we might need to do a special at some point for founders and financial education. So if you want it, let us know. But thank you.
You're so welcome. It's been so lovely to be here. I haven't even touched my coffee. I'm so sorry. I've had a lovely coffee made for me, and I've literally let it go cold because we've just been chatting the whole time. But there you go. Beautiful.
Thank you for listening. Shows like ours grow when listeners like you shout about us from the rooftops. So if you're feeling extra generous today, why not share your favourite episode or your top takeaway from this one on social media, in a WhatsApp chat with fellow founders, or any Slack groups you're in. And don't forget to tag us online. And for those of you curious what I get up to when not interviewing founders for this show, I have a new startup, If We Raise, aiming to get expertise and capital to underrepresented founders earlier. You can follow what my co-founder Tim and I are up to via @IfWeRaiseTogether on Instagram or @IfWeRaise on LinkedIn and Twitter. We'll be sharing our lessons learned along the way, as well as highlighting the incredible founders and angel investors joining the If We Raise journey.
One of the most annoying things that can happen to any of us is getting cold outreach that feels like the company hasn't done any research on you. So it's no surprise that investors like outreach from founders that feels like they've actually researched them. That's why I was so excited when the founder of ShipShape.vc, Daniel, reached out to me about sponsoring this episode. ShipShape.vc is a search engine that's free for founders to use to find investors who have been sharing content that shows they're interested in startups like you. I've already been talking about ShipShape.vc on panels I've been on and to founders I coach, because I genuinely think it could be a massive game changer for startups. There's a link in the show notes to learn more if you're interested.